Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yep, these are moving. 5. Just count it down.
Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Alrighty. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Mic check, mic check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Mic check, mic check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Mic check, mic check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Mic check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Mic check, mic check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Mic check, mic check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Mic check, mic check. 1, 2. Mic check, mic check. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Mic check, mic check. Mic check, mic check.
Testing, testing. Testing, huh?
You think we've got it now, sir? You're good with them all?
They worked it out. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming by. Wherever you go, I'm gonna whoever's talking, I'm over here. And if the chairman's talking, or someone in the majority is talking, I'm pointing over there. So I would say, you can sort of. Don't worry about it. Hello, it's Mark. Hey, Chris. Yep. We are up and working. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for checking. Yep. Take care. Bye. Do you know how long this is going to go? How many panels? It's 2 panels, right?
I think it's going to be 2 panels and it might be 2 rounds of questions.
So it's going to be like 2 or 3 hours.
Probably 2, 2.5-ish, I guess.
Good, thank you.
There's a lot of other things going on right now.
Yeah.
Ms. Esty, I want to introduce you to the IG. Who's from?
Hi, Mike.
In Boston.
Testing, testing, 1, 2. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning. The oversight hearing of the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs will now come to order. I'd like to welcome the Undersecretary of Benefits, Paul Lawrence. Since this is your first appearance before this subcommittee, before we begin this hearing, I would also like to yield to the full committee chairman, Phil Rowe. I understand that Chairman Rowe would like a few moments to clarify something discussed during the Economic Opportunity hearing a couple weeks ago. And with that, Chairman Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Boss for giving me just a few minutes of the hearing time today to ask a question regarding a topic that's been prominent in the news and is of the utmost importance to our student veterans. Dr. Lawrence, thank you for being here to testify today. I understand that the question I'm about to ask is not on today's topic, but I feel like it's very important that we clarify these things. Yesterday, Secretary Wilkie released a statement on his plan to address GI Bill payment and system rollout delays, and that statement said in part, quote, "During this time, VBA will pay monthly housing allowance rates for the post-9/11 GI Bill at the current academic year uncapped Department of Defense basic housing allowance rates. The VBA will also correct retroactively any underpayments resulting from Section 107 and 501 implementation problems," end quotes. On November 15th, you and Director of Education Services, Mr. Worley, testified before this committee regarding GI Bill payment and system delays. At that hearing, Mr. Worley stated, quote, "We will not go back and try to recover the overpayments once the IT fix is in. And where we have underpaid our beneficiaries, we will make them whole at the time the IT fix goes in," end quote. My staff received information yesterday which appears to be in apparent conflict with what previously and publicly was stated. So my question, Dr. Lawrence, is this. Will the new effective date of Section 107 be when the system is ready, or will you go back and, as you and Mr. Worley promised a few weeks ago, ensure that all students be made whole who are underpaid since the August 1, 2018 deadline stated in the law?
Thank you. Let me clarify. We're going to go back and, for the fall of 18, recompute the payments using the 18 rates, as you indicated, and we will make those people whole. Okay? So overpayments, if there are any, will be disregarded. Underpayments will be adjusted, and those veterans will get a check in January. When the new law goes into effect in the spring of 2020, we will use the new rates going forward.
So basically, the students are going to be held harmless either way.
That's
correct. The question I have, because there's, and I won't take too much more of the committee's time, but we've got to have a whole new system. I think that, as I understand it, that system that we've got with currently is not going to be used, and it's going to be rebid. Is that correct?
Certainly, you're right. So the announcement yesterday reflected our fundamental thinking about what the options are going forward, that we need to really address all the learning we've had and do something different. That's correct.
And I agree with that. And is that going to create a problem on the look back? Because we're going to have hundreds of thousands of these to go through within a year. Because I think what I'd heard by the end of December of 2019, next year, December of 19, would be when it would be fully operational. I think that's the date certain that we were given.
That's correct. For the spring of 2020, we'll be ready in December of 2019.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Rowe. Okay, so we're going to move back to our planned hearing. Today we're going to focus on how the VA develops and carries out the new policies and procedures. Most of you know that I ran a family trucking business for more than 10 years. I know that in order to make successful changes to our company, you have to sit down and create a plan to carry out the changes. For instance, you have to decide whether employees will be needed and need new training, or if we're going to have to update computer software. You also have to think about how many modifications would impact the rest of the business, especially whether there will be unintended consequences that will cause problems down the line. Finally, you have to design and execute the implementation plan and figure out whether the changes are working as well as you'd hoped. Unfortunately, according to the IG, it looks like the VA does not take these common sense steps when it develops new programs. In the last few months, the IG has released at least 3 reports that document the problems that arose when VA implemented new policies or initiatives. VA had these problems because it doesn't appear that the VBA took the time to consider what they needed to do successfully and put the new procedures into place, such as adequately updating the IT systems or training employees prior to implementation. It also looks like the VA wasn't taking the time to evaluate whether they were working as intended. In one report, the IG discovered that when NWQ went into effect, claims based on military sexual trauma, or MST, were assigned to any employee, even if that employee did not have specific MST training. In this case, the IG estimates that about 1,300, or almost 50%, of the MST claims were not properly developed before VA issued a denial. Although I am troubled by these cases, they may not have been decided properly. We have to remember that this does not necessarily mean that all of these cases were improperly denied. But it does mean that the VA did not and didn't follow all of the safeguards to ensure that these particularities, this particular sensitive issue and these particular sensitive cases were handled in the way they should have been. I think I can safely speak for all of my colleagues when I say the claims involving military sexual trauma are some of the most sensitive that the department handles. These veterans have gone through an unimaginable ordeal, and VA owes it to them to ensure that the cases involving an alleged MST are processed correctly. Dr. Lawrence, I look forward to hearing from you about the VBA intends and what it tends to move forward based on this report. The IG also reviewed how the VA handles claims that include an intent to file form. VA developed the intent to file initiative to allow veterans to preserve an early effective date even if they don't have enough information to file the formal claim. However, VA didn't think to update VBMS to flag when the veterans submit an intent to file form. As a result, the IG estimates that as many as 23,000 veterans may have gotten the wrong effective date on their claim. Even worse, these IG reports expose another major issue within VBA, poor quality control. If the IG had not reviewed these three programs, I don't know how the VBA would have ever identified the problem and taken corrective action. I wish I could have say these were isolated incidents, but we haven't seen before. I think one reason so many VA's new initiatives fail or cause serious problems is because VA is so anxious to find a silver bullet that painlessly solves all the problems. But the VBA repeatedly rolls out new initiatives before fully testing them or considering the downstream impact the changes will have on or how it will affect the VA and how they can better serve the veteran. I was encouraged that the Undersecretary for Benefits, Paul Lawrence, met with me and my staff, and he shared with us that he recognizes the VBA has to refocus on improving services for veterans rather than making employees' jobs easier. I also appreciate the fact the Undersecretary's commitment to reassessing how the VBA does business so that there is more care and consideration to how the VBA rolls out new programs instead of rushing to get out a product that may not be ready to go live. That is a step in the right direction. I look forward to the hearing and hearing from the Secretary on how he intends to change the VA's culture and adopt good management practices. We all want the same thing, to ensure that the veterans receive the benefits they have earned. Now, I'm going to turn over to our distinguished ranking member, Ms. Esty, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for scheduling today's hearing on three reports issued in recent months by the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And you will see a great deal of consistency between the Chairman's remarks and mine. And I think you have come to know that this Committee works in a very bipartisan way, and we all share the same mission, but share some of the same concerns about what we see happening. Each one of these IG reports raises serious questions about inadequate processing of veterans' disability compensation claims by the Veterans Benefit Administration. I want to start by thanking Dr. Lawrence and his team for being here today to respond to these findings, to describe what you are doing in response to this, and again for meeting with the chairman and with me at length prior to today's hearing. Though this hearing is setting on the reports on military sexual trauma, processing inaccuracy, and unnecessary medical exams, there's an additional IG report on the processing of ALS claims that points to similar issues, and I do want to make a brief aside. It looks like we've reached some accommodation on ALS, and I hope you'll have a chance to describe that, which I think is indicative of what is encouraging to me about the attitude you are bringing to changing culture and going that extra mile. I'm grateful to the VSO representatives in all parts of the country who raised the alert on some of these issues and who must play a direct role in the development and implementation of remedial policy initiatives and procedures recommended by the IG and with which VA has concurred. Let me be clear. When the report on military sexual trauma came to my attention in August, I was disappointed and disturbed. I had expected that after VBA provided liberalized guidance in 2011 and VBA's concurrence in the recommendation of the GAO report in 2014, that veterans who filed disability compensation claims for PTSD as a result of military sexual trauma would be finding an easier path establishing service connection, required for accurate compensation claim ratings, and that access to VA mental health care and treatment programs that are so important to recovery. But for too many, this is apparently still not the case. The IG has reported that 50% of the denied claims that they examined from 2017 involved processing errors. I know that Dr. Lawrence as well was taken aback with the report when it was issued because he immediately put into place a plan of action, including reviewing 2 years of claims. But to be blunt, however, there are patterns in all of the reports that need to concern all of us, this committee and you as well. I see a pattern of not sharing and disseminating best practices as an ongoing basis and update when VBA is getting reports back that needs to be part of a continuous improvement, as Chairman Boss talked about, as we can learn from the private sector. With the national work queue in place, this should facilitate that, but there needs to be a mission to disseminate those best practices when we learn them. That will help address continuing inconsistencies in regional offices, that just with the national work queue, we shouldn't be seeing that kind of variability that we're seeing. It's of particular concern on the military sexual trauma claims, and look forward to hearing your responses on that. As the chairman has noted at length, a real concern with inadequate planning. You are very responsive, but you need to take time to step back and figure out how best to implement. There are several instances in the report where it's clear that there were secondary impacts that were not properly assessed, or at least not communicated back to us. If more time was needed or resources, we need to be informed of that. It's not enough to respond to an IG report and tick the box, because that's not necessarily achieving the mission. And this really is my overall point. The mission is to serve our veterans, and it is a customer service endeavor. And so that requires going that extra mile. The IG report sometimes takes several years to produce. We know in the case of, say, military sexual trauma, the training materials that we have now are way better than they were 2 years ago. There needs to be constant updating of that training. There needs to be dissemination of best practices. So if the IG puts forward a plan of action, you actually need to be pushing back to say, we want to achieve the mission, but if there's a better way to do it, we're going to do that way, and not just taking the training materials that are noted, say the IG says, best practices from 2013. Well, that's not good enough in 2018. And so that's a broader issue. That's a broader issue of owning the continuous improvement the mission of serving our veterans and being proactive in that as opposed to reactive to this committee, the Senate, or the IG reports. I know everybody here sees themselves as being on Team Veteran, Team America. But we have to deal with the culture issues that have led to this series of IG reports, series of concerns that the mark is being missed. And that is not good enough for our veterans. It is discouraging and frustrating to the taxpayers, and we need to do collectively better. But that is going to require you to be proactive in letting us know and looking for ways to do that. I know it is important to recognize we have a number of people here today for whom the GI Bill revelations are going to be important. But again, the purpose of this hearing is in particular to focus on these IG reports that we've had over the last couple of months. With that, I want to thank Dr. Lawrence, Ms. Murphy, Mr. Clark, and the IG, Mr. Missel, for being with us here today, and we look forward to your presentations.
Thank you, Ms. Esty. I want to welcome the witnesses who join us this morning, and thank you for taking time out of your day and being here today. Our first witness is the Honorable Paul R. Lawrence, who is Under Secretary of Benefits for VA. He's accompanied by Mr. Willie C. Clark, Sr., VBA's Deputy Undersecretary of Field Operations, and Ms. Beth Murphy, the Director of Compensation Services for VBA. Also joining us at the table is the Honorable Michael J. Missel, who is the Inspector General for the VA OIG. Welcome to all of you. I want to remind the witnesses that your complete written statement will be entered into the hearing record. Dr. Lawrence, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Boss, Ranking Member ST, and members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to speak on the topic of VBA's development and implementation of policy initiatives. But before I get into my opening statement on the subject of this morning's hearing, I want to address a misleading NBC News story from late yesterday that gives the false impression that some veterans on the GI Bill will not be made whole with respect to their housing payments based on the announcement VA made yesterday. Nothing could be further from the truth. Each and every veteran on the post-9/11 GI Bill will be made 100% whole, retroactively if need be, for their housing benefits for this academic year based on the current uncapped DoD rates, and beginning in spring 2020, we will be in a position to provide veterans with the new rates where applicable to meet the law known as the Forever GI Bill. Once again, each and every, and I mean every single veteran, will be made whole for their housing benefits this year. As announced yesterday, the rates we are providing for the current year, uncapped DoD basic rates for housing allowance based on the location of the school's main campus rather than the physical location of the student. For many students, the DoD BH rate will be equal to or higher than their current payment. If a student was overpaid due to the changes in law or because of VBA's challenges in implementing the law, the student will not be held liable for the debt. And starting in spring term of 2020, VA will have solved its current technology challenges so that the department is in a position to provide post-9/11 GI Bill veterans the new rates where applicable to comply with the Forever GI Bill. Let's move to the topics at hand. We recognize the significant role that oversight plays in the importance of the veteran service organizations. We have worked hard to foster our relationship with the Office of the Inspector General, the General Accountability Office, and with congressional members and staffers. We meet monthly with the OIG to discuss trends and review findings. We have also recurring meetings with GAO. Since June, we've held monthly meetings with VSOs to discuss improvement plans to address issues that affect veterans. Working with these partners ensures together that the right elements as we move forward in developing and assessing our plans for implementation. We appreciate the special relationship VBA has with the OIG. The invaluable feedback and observations the OIG provides to VBA leadership enhance our ability to review our effectiveness and validate our plans. We count on this continued collaborative relationship and the feedback that is received. We concur with all the findings in recent reports and are executing these recommendations. Let me begin with the report on military sexual trauma. VBA is committed to serving our nation's veterans by processing claims to MST in an accurate and caring manner. By October 2nd, 2018, VBA provided updated training and guidance to claims processor. Additionally, VBA developed an action plan that puts us on track to conduct special focus reviews and consistency studies in a timely manner. Therefore, we are returning to the best practices that previously made us effective, which includes the designation of specialized claims processor to work these sensitive cases. Let me turn to the intent to file. VBA appreciates the acknowledgement by the OIG that the error rate dropped steadily to 4% during the course of its review. The report also noted that after March 24, 2015, VA could no longer grant entitlements to benefits using an informal claim, and a new form was required. The report highlighted issues identified with this new form. It also noted that the form was introduced with a quick rollout and insufficient training. We have done better with our ITF claims, and we were able to fix issues while this report was in motion. Let me turn to the report on reexamination. While veterans are service-connected for a disability that is likely to improve, VBA establishes a plan to review the current severity of the condition. Many of these reviews result in reexamination. OIG's key findings included reducing the number of unnecessary reexaminations. In response to this recommendation, VBA has provided targeted training to identify where reexamination is needed. We have also created tracking systems which allow us to better identify and manage the workload. VBA has also developed a phase implementation plan to assess quality. Each of the phases focuses on a set of business rules that help us identify unnecessary case reviews. Finally, I'll address the most recent report on claims for ALS. VBA concurred with OIG's findings and has taken steps to address the recommendations to improve the proficiency of our staff. On November 19, 2018, VBA issued guidance and updated training to specialized claims processors assigned to work these complex claims. Mr. Chairman, we've heard the concerns that VBA has rolled out many programs too quickly and with insufficient training. Previously, in an effort to address problems, we focused on unilateral decisions and did not engage our stakeholders early enough. Since I arrived, we have been more thoughtful and systematic in our approach. I developed 3 priorities, the third of which is fostering a culture of collaboration. One example of the difference in management style is my first senior leadership conference, where meaningful discussions led to the development of 14 integrated groups with both headquarter and field membership. These groups gather data, conduct analysis, collaborate with stakeholders, and map out plans for solutions on topics ranging from performance management to quality improvements to reducing rework. I launched several organizational assessments, including utilizing external consultants to survey several functions and offices in VBA to obtain objective insights, appraisals, and recommendations for improvement based on best practices. I am implementing a deliberative approach to planning, consulting, executing, assessing, and then doing course corrections and leveraging best practices with each new initiative or policy change. VBA is now focused on continuous improvement, and we do this deliberatively and collaboratively. We look forward to coming back to you as a group or individually to discuss our successes. This concludes my testimony. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Missel, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Boss, Ranking Member Esty, Chairman Rowe, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss my office's oversight of VBA's programs and operations. I want to begin by detailing recent changes to our oversight model for VBA that allows us to better review national policy changes and focus on VBA's high-impact programs and operations. Previously, we largely conducted oversight through inspections of VBA's 56 regional offices. In October of 2017, we implemented a new national inspection model for VBA oversight. Under this new model, we now conduct nationwide audits and reviews of high-impact programs and operations within VBA with a focus on identifying the root causes of any problems uncovered and making meaningful recommendations. Since implementing this new model, we have published 15 oversight reports related to VBA. In these reports, we made 55 recommendations for improvement, identifying nearly $278 million in potential monetary benefits. I want to highlight 4 recently issued reports related to our oversight of VBA. In July, we reported on whether VBA required disabled veterans to receive unwarranted medical reexaminations. In August, we published a report that examined whether VBA staff correctly processed claims related to veterans' military sexual trauma prior to denying the claims. Also in August, we published the results of a nationwide review of whether VBA staff assigned correct effective dates for compensation benefits for veterans using the recently implemented intent to file process. And last week, we reported on whether VBA accurately decided veterans' claims involving service-connected ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. These reports identified common systemic issues that contributed to our findings. The primary root causes of the problems we found were deficient internal controls, inadequate program leadership and monitoring, a lack of information technology system functionality, and the unintended impacts of VBA's National Work Queue implementation. To be clear, we believe that recent VBA initiatives and policy changes were well-intentioned to expedite the benefits delivery process. However, these reports revealed that VBA leadership's emphasis on efficiency has affected the ability to review and process claims accurately. As detailed in our reports and my written testimony, these recurring deficiencies resulted in the inadequate delivery of services and inaccurate benefits rendered to veterans. We understand that VBA's leadership has been taking numerous actions for the last several years to address the changing and growing demands for benefits and services and to reduce the claims backlog. However, the recurring deficiencies we identified are often the result of VBA leadership making management and operational decisions without fully considering and planning for potential unintended consequences resulting from their actions. These include sacrificing accuracy for timeliness, rolling out national initiatives after small and short pilot programs, and implementing programs that do not have fully developed IT systems and robust internal controls. For example, VBA's intent to file initiative had a short 6-month implementation and delivery period. Errors generally occurred because VBA did not take the time to set up adequate standard operating procedures before implementing the new initiative. Additionally, VBA's IT system lacked the functionality to assist rating personnel in assigning correct effective dates for benefits for intent to file claims. Since nationwide implementation of the intent to file process, VBA has taken steps to improve its control activities and IT functionality, which has resulted in improved accuracy. But the errors that occurred during the initial implementation period will have to be reviewed and corrected, requiring the use of additional VBA resources. We believe VBA's implementation of our recommendations will help limit the unintended consequences of VBA's policies and programs and better position VBA to provide services to veterans and their families in the most effective and efficient manner possible. VBA has generally concurred with the 55 recommendations we have made under our new national inspection model and has provided acceptable action plans. VBA must now follow through with the difficult work of implementation if they are to carry out the responsibilities effectively and be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. We will, of course, monitor their progress. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Missel. With that, we're going to begin questioning, and I will allow myself 5 minutes to start off. But let me first off also say, Dr. Lawrence, that your announcement of making it very clear to us and to the public that it is to make all of our GI veterans whole and or also then not to then hold them harmless for those that may have been overpaid is a good start for this hearing. And let me tell you that I believe that it'll also calm down a lot of the questions that would have probably come up here today. That being said, we do have some real issues that we've got to deal with. And I'm gonna go a little off script here because I know the question I want to ask, but I want to express it this way. I know you came in May, and but I was a full-time firefighter, and I can remember my first night on duty, and the fire chief came in and he says, "Mike, I want you to know something." He said, "You are in a job that there's going to be a lot of problems, and you're going to. You didn't create the problem. You got to fix it, though. Whatever you do, don't make it worse." Whatever you do, don't make it worse, okay? Let me simply ask, how are you planning to change the culture from the VBA, from its present issues that arise from this systematic lack of planning and effectiveness, and how to implementate things going forward, not only on past projects, but on new projects?
I'm going to change the culture by modeling different behavior. Well, let me explain. When I think about these problems, I draw on my experience in the private sector, just like you, sir. And what I observe and I take away from this is sort of, other general management perspectives. As Mr. Missel described, decisions were made very quickly and probably without the right amount of expertise in the room to really appreciate it. I've slowed things down, so decisions are made more deliberately. I call it go slow to go fast. We focus on fewer things, and we spend more time thinking about what the risks are and the potential unintended consequences. And more importantly, or equally importantly, we have more people in the room to make sure we have voices. I take diversity and inclusivity very serious, but to me it's not a skin color thing. Inclusivity refers to bringing people with different perspectives into the conversation to avoid the things we're just describing. So those are the two things that drive my understanding of how we're going to go forward, my leadership style. That's been demonstrated from the very first time I showed up, even in confirmation, when I talked about priorities and what we were going to focus on. Most importantly, you heard me make reference to the Directors Conference, the Leadership Conference in September. That's where we really did the work I'm describing, where people came into the conference having prepared thoughts around key topics, where we had rigorous discussion about what the possibilities were. There were no talking heads in this conference. There was real work being done till 8 o'clock the 2.5 days we were together. And at the end of that, we put forth ideas about how we would work on things like rework, like quality. Everybody in the room, all 76 people, got a star and got to go vote on what we thought the best answers forward were. Those were the projects we took down and are now working, which will be harvested in the spring and beyond. So that is the different behavior we are now doing. So I think collectively, the good ideas in the room, really make me confident about the value, the talent on the team, and what we can do differently going forward.
My next question is for Mr. Missel. You mentioned that the VA has historically exhibited systematic problems associated with and how it implements policies and initiatives such as inadequate training, incomplete IT functions, deficient risk mitigation strategies, and lacks quality control. Have you identified other areas where VA can improve its foresight to better plan for the new policies initiatives to avoid potential negative impact on claims processes?
Yes, you've mentioned some of the more significant ones that we found. One of the other issues that we think is real important is communication within VBA, because there's instances where one side involved in an issue may be aware of it and the other side doesn't get that same information. It's very hard to properly implement something if everybody is not on the same page as to the information there, what the goals are, what the process is, et cetera. And so what we try to do in our reports, we not only try to get it right, we try to be fair, but we also try to say what the root cause is that we find. Because if a mistake is made, we want to be able to point out that mistake so that it doesn't happen again.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn over now to Ranking Member Essie for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to have a series of fairly specific questions I'm going to submit for the record, but I want to continue this line of discussion because I think it's really important about changing the culture. Things are happening quickly. You're being asked to do a lot of new things in VA quickly, and we understand that can be a lot, especially for an institution that, coming out of a military background, doesn't always embrace change that quickly. So you've got a mindset change you have to deal with. I want to talk about the communication issue. How do we ensure that that's happening? How do we disseminate those best practices? The National Work Queue was a huge undertaking. We should be reaping the benefits of that now, but that means that information has to be assessed and it has to be pushed back out to all of the offices. So why don't you talk about that, as well as specialization. I think that's come up on the quality control. These more difficult claims, ALS being one, military sexual trauma being another. They require specialization to get right because of the nature of the trauma to the veteran involved, the importance of doing those accurately and well. It is just not fair or reasonable to think we should be training each and every claims reviewer to do that. That is not a good use of time, and it should not be done. So can you talk about, Dr. Lawrence, how you're going to identify the areas that are going to require specialization, what you're doing to make sure that happens, so that you are proactively, not just in response to an IG report, but how are you going to track what are those areas that require specialization? How are you going to do that training? How are you going to update the training so that we are continuing to have best information and best practices disseminated across the totality of VA?
So let me start with specialization first, ma'am. Yes, we agree. There should be more specialization. The benefits of it are clear, and we should do more of it. Probably early summer, unrelated to the report, we began to think about how we process claims under the guise to be better for veterans. And part of it was efficiency. We are identifying which claim should be bundled in a specialized manner like this. And so we have what we call lanes, and there's specialization by virtue of this. We are trying to balance the efficiency we get, the sensitivity, the caring, and quite frankly, the right places we should do this around the country. This is something we're already working on, and we think the benefits are clear, and as we discussed with you leading up to this, to build on even some of the things we better understand about the veteran experience. So we should do more of that, but I want to be careful it won't be the answer to every problem. But we see the benefits of specialization, and we want to reap those. We draw on best practices from some of the leading companies, and they caution us to be careful because at some point you can go too far. But we don't think we're anywhere near close to that based on the work we've done. If I could just answer your other two questions. In terms of communication, yes, ma'am, that was something I thought about a long time. In any large organization, as you know, we have 24,000 people. Our construct is headquarters and then 56 regional offices around the country. We have tiers of people and levels in between that we need to communicate with. This also came up in our directors conference, and there's a project that's just concluded about how we're going to more formally communicate what the mechanisms are, what the vehicles are, what the responsibility of everybody is to participate, and then pass that information along. That will not solve every problem, but at least we'll begin to address the awareness of issues, pushing it out to everybody so we have greater consistency. And your last thing, I think, was the training to make sure we got it. And let me draw on Beth here because I know she's been thinking a lot about this as we deal with that.
Thank you, sir. We've really been empowered under Undersecretary Lawrence's leadership to look for different ways to do things. As far as training, I think in the past we've relied on a more one-dimensional aspect of training, which is we put out a call or we have a PowerPoint material, someone delivers that, or you do that online. These days, when you want to find out how to do something, what I do, and I know a lot of folks do, is you go online and you look for a video. I would rather have someone show me how to do something rather than just tell me how to do something. So we're capitalizing on that with new technology and tools and platforms. With the intent to file, that was part of the solution. We used a video to instruct folks how to look for the effective date with the intent to file, and we reaped the benefits down to a 4% error rate, and more recently a 2% error rate. We're doing the same thing with the military sexual trauma. Rather than a PowerPoint, it is now a video that says, I'm putting myself in the place of the military sexual trauma coordinator. We're going to walk through the checklist, how to develop for these cases, how to make these phone calls. So it's a more dynamic, three-dimensional training that folks can access at their leisure. And it also, it's mandatory, but then you can go back and look at it for a refresher as necessary.
Thank you, and I see my time has expired. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Kaufman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Missel, what is the central problem here? We get this all the time, that, how we're going to do things differently, and at the end, they always fail. The VA always fails. Is it that they never assess the requirements properly, they don't manage contracts properly? What would you say is the central reason for failure?
I think there are a number of different reasons why these programs don't operate as effectively and as efficiently as they should. You know, I think you can start first with the planning phase. Do they do enough to plan? Do they take the proper time? Secondly, do they determine whether or not any IT that's going to go along with the program has the proper functionality, has it been properly tested? Next is just once it's implemented, what are the internal controls? Because in question of like communication, how do we know it's working? It's working as if you're looking at it in hindsight, looking at the controls to determine whether or not you have issues there. And finally, do a root cause analysis that if something hasn't worked as anticipated, that you take a look at it again so you don't make the same mistake. So I think putting all those together, that's sort of a sort of general summary of the issues that we generally find.
Does the VA, Mr. Missel, bring in outside consultants, experts, to be able to define? It's one thing to have a contractor come in to implement a system. It's the other thing to objectively define the requirements. And it seems to me that, at least certainly when we looked at the issue concerning the post 9/11 GI Bill and the changes, and we're going to be doing that in the second round, so I don't want to really get into that now. But they were unable to assess, number one, could they do it, and said that they could do it. And number two, even come up with a timeline. Number three, they couldn't manage the contract, and the contract ultimately failed, is my understanding. But is it that they need professionals from outside the VA to come in and write these requirements and manage the contracts, or are they doing that?
In a number of situations, they do bring in people from the outside. VA has thousands of contractors who are working at VA. And sometimes it's as simple as just working together, as to make sure that when you have a contractor working with the VA staff and systems, are they all integrated well? And that's one thing we find, is that sometimes the integration is not what you would like it to be, and then you're sometimes working at cross purposes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Berkman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. These hearings are always informative, I believe, to all of us. I'm very appreciative, as I know we all are, of your proactive nature in this. People who serve in uniform have to be proactive by nature because the mission requires movement, adaptation, and overcoming obstacles in order to succeed. And I would suggest to you that any culture, whether it be here in the Congress or whether it be in the VA or the Department of Defense or anybody else related to veterans, if they don't have that same culture of adapt and overcome, we're going to have long-term failure, okay? So having said that, Dr. Lawrence, when you talk about, if you will, revamping, revising, building a new culture under your command, can you give me an instance of some of the things you might be doing outside a norm, that we've always done it this way kind of thing, to build that culture with those under your command?
Sure. One of the things we've done, and I alluded to this in my opening statement, is really searching hard for best practices in industry. If you think about what we do, for example, we maintain an insurance product line. We can learn from how the world-class insurance companies learn, and copy those behaviors that are relevant. So I want to really draw on leverage best practices from around the world. I don't mean as good as it gets in government. I mean world-class elsewhere, because we can be that good, because the talent at VBA is that strong.
Okay. Let me ask a question, because I appreciate that. Looking outside your organization for best practices is what I heard. Do people come to work because they have to or because they want to under your command?
I don't know the answer for me specifically, but I will tell you the survey of why VBA employees come to work every day is the purpose of the mission of serving veterans. We've had outside studies done of that prior to me, and consultants come and talk to us all the time and say that is a very powerful draw to why folks come to work at VBA.
Okay. The use of contractors. How if you have those who are on your payroll, if you will, as your employees under your command, and then you have this adjunct group that melds into your organization for a time, but not as permanent employees. How then, what do you do within the culture that you are trying to create that will make those contractors feel part of that team, that they're actually, they're just trying to stay because they want to stay working for the veterans? What kind of programs or policies or training things do you have in place to bring those contractors in, that it's one group? You can't tell who's the contractor and who's the employee.
So we focus on, when we use contractors the way you're describing, because sometimes we use them for spot solutions, right? They come, they assess something, and they leave. So they wouldn't quite qualify for what you're describing. We focus on integrated product teams and try real hard to get contractors who are also focused on serving veterans. As you know, there's a requirement that we deal with generally veteran-owned businesses, and that sets us in a very good position as well. Many folks have traveled in and out of the VA processes, and they get it. So really, we've seen people working closely together, and quite frankly, we think VA is a good client to have if you're a contractor or consultant, and people come to us and they want to stay for long periods of time through the contractor relationship.
Okay, and one last question, because I see I have about a minute left. Is there any current surge capability that, or on the horizon for you as you build your organization here going towards the future? Again, mission-oriented, we know we have, we're talking military language here, but when you need to surge, is there anything in your plan to create some level, doesn't have to be a lot necessarily, but that idea within your organization that if you need to redistribute assets for a short period of time, is there anything in your plan that would indicate that that's part of it as well?
Yes, sir, there is. So, for example, in the September-October timeframe, when we were experiencing real difficulties with the GI Bill, our call centers were overwhelmed. We're staffed for 15,000 calls a day. We were getting north of 25,000 a day. I'm looking at best practices for other call centers to figure out what the surge capabilities are. Often they have relationships with other external entities for situations like this, Christmas, for example. So yes, that's definitely part of our plan, because I don't think the answer for veterans should be wait.
Okay, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lawrence, yesterday's news report regarding the Forever GI Bill was deeply concerning, even more than when we heard from you testify last before my subcommittee, the Technology Modernization Subcommittee, a couple of weeks ago. Your IT systems continue to leave veterans in need. The mission of the VA should not continue to be compromised because of a foible like this. What was the rationale behind you getting rid of the Booz Allen contract? And why would you not just have Booz Allen hire different subcontractors to do the job?
Sir, we have not made the decision to get rid of Booz Allen, so that's inaccurate. That's being discussed right now. They do many things for VA broadly, and they will continue. I think we're trying to figure out how to redirect them to the work they continue to do for VA. So that's a misnomer. To get to your broader question, though, based on...
Why don't we pause with that? How much have you paid Booz Allen?
I don't know. I don't administer those contracts. We can take that for the record.
Okay, please do. Then go ahead.
More broadly, I think, my recommendation for which the Secretary and others turned on and accepted dealt on sort of three primary tenets. And this was pretty clear to me based on my professional experience as well as just traveling through this journey that I arrived at. We had real challenges with accountability, and so I stepped forward and said I would be the person accountable for implementing the GI Bill. We had difficulties with the program management structure, so we will engage our FFRDC, Federal Funded Research and Development Center, the special relationship we have with the MITRE Corporation, to provide conflict-free advice on the program integration, the schedule, and help us manage it. And then we'll go find a world-class contractor to deal with the following: systems integration and software development. 2 weeks ago when I sat here, you listened to the contractor say, I do software development. We need to do systems integration. You'll recall he drew the chart with all the boxes. That's what he was talking about. In hindsight, we need a systems integrator and software development corporation to help us.
Okay, let me switch gears a little bit. One of the issues that came up on the committee staff's trip recently to Muskogee, GI Bill processing office was the problems that processors were having with Microsoft Word and other Microsoft systems. It's my understanding that you were given a plan before Thanksgiving from OI&T to bring in a team to try to address these problems. Have you acted on that plan, and if not, why not?
Sure, we had a team there when I visited the next week, so yes.
And what have they done? What has that team done?
They've
to
been
address those issues?
deconflicting the software and identifying workarounds to make it so it does not lock up, and that's been dramatically reduced. I'm still concerned that we're using workarounds versus a solution. So we're trying to figure out whether we need to engage Microsoft, for example. But again, that's been.
So you're still trying to figure out whether or not to engage Microsoft? What
yeah,
has that team accomplished? What has come out?
They're about 95% of the way there, and the question is, is it because we have workarounds or we solve the problems, and that's still being assessed.
When do you think we'll be 100% of the way there?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll be happy to come back and talk to you about it.
All right, I yield back.
Mr. Adwag, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the ranking member for holding this important meeting. I also want to welcome the panel. Thank you very much. My question is for Inspector General Missel. Are there any of your recommendations in the MST report that VA is not addressing?
I'm sorry, that is not.
Are there any of your recommendations in the MST report that VA is not addressing?
No, they've concurred with all of the recommendations and are in the process of implementing them, and we will review that to ensure that they're fully implemented.
And Dr. Lawrence, how are you planning to address the rest of IG's recommendations? And when is the timeline to complete these actions?
I'm going to draw on you. We're going to address them aggressively. We've already started on some, so I know. Let me draw on Willie here because he actually implements the plans we have.
Good morning. We have a several-pronged approach to dealing with the MST. Beth spoke to earlier the training. We're updating the modules in a YouTube type of an effect. We also, Beth, we have updated the manual, mandating the use of a checklist that all of our claims processors are supposed to use or will use. We're mandating a checklist for them to use. That way, it will improve upon our quality. They are guided into a step-by-step process of what they need to do for the appropriate development of that case and to rate the case. We also have identified coordinators for MST for each of our regional offices. We have conducted training, all of which has happened. We had completed some training in September and the end of last month. We have another set of training that's supposed to be done, or it has been completed at the end of this month. So every one of the recommendations we have implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I see that our colleague, Representative Peters, has joined us here, and I would like to ask unanimous consent that Representative Peters be allowed to sit at the dais and ask questions. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Mr. Peters, you are recognized. Chairman Rowe.
I want to just get a couple of things clarified on, and this GI Bill is complicated, so that I understand and so that our students out there understand. Dr. Lawrence, is that when the law went into effect August 1st, it contained two sections, 107 and 501. And as I understand it, the 501 section is a COLA, it's a cost of living adjustment. The 107 section is where a student would be paid a per diem based on where the bricks and mortar campus is. And then lastly, the online students are paid at a different rate. So am I correct on all that? I understand that?
That's correct.
Okay. And I want to make sure that I understand that when the law states that all this goes into effect on 1 August of this year, 2018, are we saying, and I misunderstood you, but are we saying that the 107 provision and the 501 provision will be made whole, those students under both those provisions will be made whole as of the law was stated on 1 August. Am I correct on that?
We're going to go back into the fall of 18 and make sure they get the DOD uncapped rates. When we
Back again, are we going to follow the 107 section of law which says where the bricks, like a student, for instance, let's say the student is going to college in San Francisco, has a much higher per diem, that if they went to college where I did in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is a per diem that'd be less than half or a third of that much. That student who took the majority of their classes in Clarksville will be paid a certain per diem, am I correct?
That's correct,
And
yes.
then the student who would be in San Francisco, which is obviously much more expensive to live there, we're going to go, because those payments are not, may not be correct right now. Are we going to look back and follow the law and pay them going forward? Then what's the discussion about changing the statute to December of 2019? That's what I don't understand. If we're going to go back and make 107 and 501, we're going to follow that, then what's the point in moving it forward? I know it's a lot of work and it is complicated, but I want to make sure we get it straight here today for the
Sure.
students. that look-
So this fall, we're using the 2017 rates. We need to use the 2018 rates. That's the true-up we're doing. When we implement the law, the Forever GI Bill, in December of 2019, we will not use the zip code. We will be using the definition of campus, and that's what we use going forward.
But the law states now that in August 1 of now, we should be doing that, correct?
That's correct.
So again, why wouldn't we follow the, because there are going to be a group of students that for at least 1.5 academic years are not going to be paid correctly and are not going to be trued up. Am I right on that? If you
No,
change
they'll
the
be
law.
they'll be trued up for this fall, okay? It is not clear what the difference will be come the implementation.
Maybe none. I mean,
Maybe none.
maybe
That's,
none.
yeah, we will have to assess the burden on schools to go back. We'll have to assess the burden on VBA, and we'll have to figure out the benefits for folks we're describing. It is not clear there will be any difference under this interpretation of what a campus is.
But, and again, I'm not trying to overdo the point, but if we follow the law as is, then you've got to go back and look. It creates, I realize, a lot of work to do that. I understand that. To go back and make sure that those students who started class in the fall semester in August of this year are going to be made whole according to the law as it was passed August 1 and stated in law August 1 of 2018.
Right. We'll seek to work with you and your staff to better understand whether that's in the best interest of veterans, given all the work you described, the potential low benefits from doing that, quite frankly. So I think we need to figure out whether we need to come back to you and ask for a legislative change to push the date to December 1st or not. It's not our intention to harm veterans. We also have to think about the broad veteran population and whether what you're describing yields any benefits, just work.
Well, I think, anyway, we'll continue this. I'll go ahead and yield back, but I want to make sure that we, off mic, work through this and just see how many veterans we're talking about, because there could be some that we've underpaid out there, and probably are veterans that have been underpaid, and we want to make sure that those veterans get what they've earned and what the law stated. I yield back.
It's Chair's intent to have a second round of questioning. The second round of questioning will be a 3-minute, so the members know. So recognizing myself, because we really want to focus, this GI thing is big, okay? And we want to know, and I think the people deserve to know, because when Representative Banks asked, there was still some confusion on the statements, I guess, that were made yesterday, and you clarified those, and I appreciate that. That being said, how many, what's our actual number of GIs that are receiving the GI benefit at this time?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but when I was here 2 weeks ago, I said it was 450,000, approximately.
Do we know an approximate error ratio, or how many people are being affected, and which ones were underpaid? I know we can't get exact number, but...
No, that's part of the problem. Without the technology, we were unable to do anything but estimate that broadly, and I'm not so certain those are accurate estimates because of the way the changes were going through. Again, I'll apologize, don't have subject matter experts here to kind of happy to take questions for the records on the GI Bill if that's what we get to.
Then the question I have on top of that is as you go back and try to figure out these errors and then live up to the commitment to make someone whole, is it going to have to be done through the tech people that you were working with originally? Because the statement that was it Bose and the contractors, are they going to have to be able to pull that out, or can your staff pull that out and figure
Sure.
that out?
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, sir. The technology is in place to do the true-up I've described for the fall of 2018. Next 2 weekends, we'll load the 2018 rates, we'll compute them, and folks who were short will get a check in January for the difference.
Okay, I think another concern is where the chairman was asking as well, this confusion about what your home zip code is, but where you are actually located, and then getting the proper per diem is vitally important, especially whenever the law has been written and said that's what we'll do, to make sure that everything is caught up and done correctly, and trying to get. I want to know from this committee's standpoint that we have the commitment that that's going to be the case where your staff is, or your group as a whole is going to be aggressive to make sure that anyone that's owed is found out that they are owed and then made whole in each one of the areas.
So, yes, generally, but let me work specifically on this. There's a couple things going on here in the new path forward. One of them is returning to the definition in the law of what a campus is. It's a building owned by an institution. That's different than the zip code thing we explained where students could do interim. This is different. That difference will go into in place December 1st, 2019 for the spring semester of 2020. When we ask to go back, it's not clear what the differences will be, and that's what we have to figure out and work with your team to figure out. Is all the processing going to end up with one person getting a check for $1? We don't know that yet. It's not our intention to harm veterans, but it's also our intention to process the GI Bill effectively and accurately going forward.
Okay, I'm out of time, but Ms. Esty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I think we need clarity on this, and this is, again, an example of we had an intent in the law. Veterans may have understood that to be a certain way, so we may still have an issue. You may look at the law and say, well, we interpret it this way. I assure you we are going to have constituents who will say that is not what we thought that to mean. So we need to be in close communication as you look at what is an error to understand there are going to be veterans who believe that they were promised this, and we need much greater clarity. And that takes me to sort of the second point. The IG noted that some of these systematic problems going back, and I'm thinking now with our hearing next week, we've got appeals modernization rolling forward. So what are we going to do not only on the Forever GI Bill, but on appeals modernization to be looking at that IT capacity and knowing what the requirements are so that we are not faced with exactly the same kind of situation with appeals modernization, where we're having to go back and redo and rerun and rework, which is one of the core things we need to stop doing, is having so much need for rework. So if you can address what is being now, are we doing beta testing? How are we going to ensure that we understand the needs the system will have from an IT point of view, that we aren't learning by the seat of our pants, having done a national rollout and actually not being ready to do that?
I don't want to steal the thunder from the team that will appear before you on next week on appeals modernization, but they'll tell you a very positive story with technology. The system is in place and they're doing end-to-end testing exactly the way you're describing. I will tell you that the takeaway from my confirmation hearing were the two things that I should worry about going forward were the GI Bill and appeals modernization. And after I was in office for 1 week, I started meeting with both teams every week for an hour to understand the state of what's going on. I'll tell you that in terms of appeals modernization, you see a very different experience. The team began working together 3 years ago. The systems we used are some of the most mature, and the technology we use is new and invented just for this purpose. So far along the way, all tests have been passed. I'm very positive. They'll tell you more about it next week, I believe.
Well, I hope we can take the lessons that are being learned there and make sure that those are used every time with forward-going programs, and to the extent we can, then put this back into the forever GI, or at least maybe we cut that off and start over again with the kind of design we're doing to benefit from this approach. Because I think sometimes trying to bootstrap and rework a system that is not working well is not a good way to go. I'm just going to put that out there as something for you to consider. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lawrence, first of all, if you're unable to meet the statutory requirements that are very clear, you need to come before the Congress of the United States to have those altered. You can't simply change the law yourself if you're unable to meet the obligations that your department agreed to and the Congress of the United States mandated through law and the President of the United States signed. Let me ask you this. How many senior executive service positions do you have in VBA?
I don't know the exact number. It's approximately 100, I would guess, but I'll get you the exact number.
You've been there for 6 months. How many SCS positions have you let go?
I think the answer is 0.
Really? Because I've had a conversation with our new secretary and followed up in writing to him that there are about 400 positions in the senior executive service level in the Department of Veterans Affairs. After the scandal with the appointment wait times, on a bipartisan basis, the Congress of the United States passed and President Obama signed the ability for you and for the senior leadership of this department, the Department of Veterans Affairs, to expeditiously let go senior executive service personnel that were not competent. In my discussions with the Secretary, he's unwilling to make that commitment to do that, to look through these 400 positions where there's objective failure and the inability to correct that failure by Inspector General reports, by GAO reports, and yet you will never change the culture of bureaucratic incompetence in the VA unless you're willing to look through those 400 positions. And where there's a lack of competence, where problems are unresolved, that you're unwilling to make those hard decisions, which our Secretary is not willing to do, which you obviously haven't done, then nothing will change. This President will fail the country in terms of the commitments that he made to change the VA. He changed the Secretary, but that was on the basis of his record in terms of personal spending or spending taxpayer dollars on a European vacation. It was not on his competence in terms of running the VA. This is the same VA of the prior administration, just papered over with saying how great things are when they're not great. I yield back.
Mr. Lamb, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If it's okay, I'm going to go back to one of the issues that this hearing was called for, having to do with processing of benefits claims. In particular, our VAs in Pittsburgh process claims involving military sexual trauma. And I know, well, I guess you can confirm for me if I'm correct, that each office is supposed to have a specialist dealing with military sexual trauma claims. Is that true? Mr. Clark?
Good morning, Mr. Lamb. That is true. We have specialized individuals for military sexual trauma at each RO. That is true.
Okay. And have you been able to fill all those positions? Are they full as of right now?
They should be full, yes. We have military sexual trauma coordinators that are full. If for some reason someone left yesterday that, that I don't know about, but generally our leaders know to keep those positions filled and to make sure that they receive all of the requisite training and quality measures are filled in order to do this work. They are not to do the work on an MST claim unless they've had the requisite training and they follow the guidelines that we've set forth with this checklist and viewing the training materials and the like.
Okay. And are they overseeing examinations for military sexual trauma done by contractors or more done by VA personnel?
For the most part, contractors.
Okay.
But there are some instances where VHA doctors perform these examinations, and again, VHA sometimes uses contractors as well.
Have you looked at the outcomes or quality of those examinations to see whether the contractors are doing an adequate job? Because I think this is an area where the VA's doctors' kind of particular training and familiarity with this population and this type of claim would really help.
I will certainly let Ms. Murphy speak to that.
So, sir, I think it's generally been about a 50-50 split overall with exams as far as VHA versus contractors. I think both entities, VHA and VBA, watch closely who's doing the exams and has quality controls, checking the reports. So I can't, in the moment, speak to the specifics, but yes, both sides are watching, both sides are engaged in this work.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And Mr. Berkman, you're recognized.
Kind of to continue on with my questioning along the line of building a culture. As we look at the GI Bill going forward and the payments and the coordination between the VA and the educational institutions, not the veteran, but the educational institutions. About a year ago, we had a hearing in here where I brought up the concept of in the Marine Corps, the sand table exercise, and we did a little, back and forth on that. But the idea of, is there, and by the way, this committee, bipartisan, is going to be the best partners that we can be with you, because we want results, just like you do. Of course, it's our job to give you the money and then hold you accountable. It's your job to execute the mission. Is there anything that we can do for you to, if you will, to participate in I'm going to call it a sand table exercise, that the goal of this exercise would be to see where the system can be gamed, whether it be accidental or on purpose, on either side of the equation. Because unless we take what we're about to implement and then put it into exercise to see, and I know all these minds on all sides of the table are smart, motivated, and potentially devious, okay? Because I have kids, I have grandkids. Why? That's how it works. And it's up to us to make sure that we, if you will, close accidental loopholes that cause others pain of loss of dollars or pain of loss of credits or whatever it happens to be. Any thoughts on where we can do that, or maybe that's already in your game plan?
Yes and yes. Absolutely want your help. A couple things immediately come to mind. One of them is when we do the user testing to sort of, get examples of veterans that we think we need to make sure the system works for. So I know your staff has been great sort of identifying people who call you and say, I'm having trouble, so we do that. In addition, I'm sure in the new plan going forward, we'll spend a lot of time with you explaining things. So I think there's probably, a reason for engagement is our interpretations of some of the things that require, and to make sure that we're coordinated on that as well.
Okay, well, again, I see my time's about to run out, but engage us early, because the sooner we engage and the sooner we pick it apart, the less we're going to have hearings like this after the fact. And I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Peters, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lawrence, I just want to make sure I'm clear on exactly what you're saying about Section 107 of the Forever GI Bill, which we passed this session. Section 107 is the section dealing with students being paid according to where they're taking the majority of their classes. And are you testifying right now that after VA finally implements Section 107 that they will go back and recompute what students would have been paid had Section 107 been in place by the August 1, 2018 deadline in the law? and if they were underpaid between August 1, 2018, and when the section is finally implemented, pay them the difference to make them whole.
What I'm testifying to is that we'll go back into the fall of 2018, put the right rates in, and make sure they get a check in January if they've been underpaid. What changes as we go forward and think about December of 2019 is the way we thought about campuses. If you recall, there was a long discussion about zip codes and practicums, and that set in motion some expectation of overpayments or underpayments and the like. When we return to the definition of campus as defined by the law and our interpretation of it, it is not clear there's going to be any changes. We've got to figure out what the implications of that are and then go back or not as appropriate.
So you're suggesting is that there's some, you're having an issue with interpreting the law as to whether money is owed?
A couple thoughts. We're not interpreting the law. The law is pretty clear. It defines campus a certain way, and we're going to go execute that.
All right.
It is not clear that possibilities. What are the possibilities? There could be wide-scale variation, and we have to go back for exactly the way you described. There could be no variation, and the going back would be energy that would be better spent processing claims going forward. That's the unknown we have to figure out. And quite frankly, work with you on, too. It's not our intention to harm people the way we're imagining. It's just our intention to process efficiently.
I want to get the sense of, it sounds to me like you're leaving yourself some flexibility as to whether to do that or not. Maybe you're assessing whether it's worth the trouble to go back and following the law as it's written. But we'd like to know whether these people are going to be made whole by that formula. And I'm having trouble getting that answer out of you, it sounds like.
We want to make people whole. I'm not trying to give you trouble. I'm just trying to not give you a blanket statement that requires tremendous of activity for no gain. So if you ask me, what should we spend an extra hour on? Processing things that yield veterans nothing, putting at risk the spring 2020 semester, or saying this doesn't yield much and we're going to move forward. We just have to figure it out. It's not my intention to be evasive. It's my offer to work with you to make sure we all come away feeling this is the right way forward.
What are you telling veterans and students now who are going into the process going forward? What are you telling them now to do?
We're telling them that you will get trued up for the fall of 18 with the right rates. They will execute the new law in the spring of 2020.
Okay. Thank you. My time has expired. I'll yield back.
Chairman Rowe.
I want to go back with what Mr. Peters, the line he was taking, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but the law states what we must do on 1 August. It's not an like you said, it's fairly clear what the law states. The question is, are we going to follow the law? That's the question. And if we're not, then we got to change the law. It's got to be changed to a different time. Otherwise, you're required by statute to go back and implement Section 107 and 501 as stated in the law. Am I correct?
That's correct. And previously, I made a request for your help to do exactly that if that's what we conclude based on the energy that it would take for potentially not much gain. We completely agree.
How will we know? I guess that's a question I have. I'm putting myself as a student out there at somewhere, sitting there thinking I have a benefit that I've earned. Am I getting paid correctly for my benefit? Am I getting unpaid? How do we determine it's too much trouble to follow the law? How's that? You follow? I'm not.
I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate that you admit you're not trying to be difficult. And I don't mean to be difficult either. I'm trying to be precise in my answer. When we adjust the rates for the fall to the 2018 rates, we'll have honored the obligation. Nobody has yet been paid under this system that doesn't exist. So there isn't a feeling of I'm owed something unless they've been able to calculate something that we've been, quite frankly, unable to calculate. Okay? When we put the new system in, we will know what that is. Somewhere along the line, as we begin to see it coming into focus, we will make an estimate of what you're just describing. What is the difference and what should we do about it? And that's what we'll have to continue to talk to you about.
So basically what we did was, just for clarity, we stood up a system that didn't work and paid people what we had paid them in the past, and we don't know what we should have paid them. Am I correct? That's pretty much what we did, because our IT system didn't work. That's what happened.
Notionally correct. That's correct.
Yeah. I yield back.
Well, I want to thank the panel for being with us. We did 2 rounds of questions. We have another panel that's coming forward, but thank you for being here, and thank you for the opportunity to say that you'll come back and try to work with us to try to straighten this out. Thank you. So we do want to invite the second panel to the table. Okay. On our second panel, we have Mr. Michael Figlioli, the Deputy Director of National Veterans Services for VFW. We have Mr. Shane Learman, Assistant National Legislative Director for DAV, and Mr. Greg Nemhard, the Deputy Director of the Veterans Affairs and Rehabilitation Division for the American Legion. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Figlioli, you are recognized to start and give your testimony for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Esty, members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the VFW, thank you for the opportunity to testify on VA's methods for developing and implementing policy changes for VA claims. The VFW National Veterans Service, established in 1919, begins its second century of service. VFW is encouraged by VA's efforts to modernize the disability claims process. VA has a number of challenges to overcome. However, we feel the process is headed in the right direction. Our philosophy in dealing with VA's bureaucracy has always been praise when you can, be critical when you must. Lately, we have found ourselves more on the critical side than we would like. VFW has consistently held that VA speeding to completion of its workload for the sake of reducing volume is precarious for both VA and our claimants. It does no good to deliver benefits to veterans faster if the decisions made are incomplete or inaccurate. It's futile to implement policies for the sake of implementing policy and declare mission accomplished. Over the last 3 years, VA has rolled out programs that were intended to alleviate a number of claims and appeals-related issues. VFW and our partner VSOs cautioned VA on numerous occasions about the pitfalls of rapid development. We are appreciative of VA's efforts in seeking VSO input for newly developed platforms. Despite repeated attempts urging VA to assess shortfalls and take corrective action before implementation, we have seen VA forced to play catch-up time and time again. VFW has been concerned since the implementation of the National Work Queue. Why do some claims seem to move smoothly through the system, while others are bogged down due to misunderstood guidance or improper application of the law? We have not discerned why, other than pointing to inconsistency in the system. Up until the decision was made to level the playing field, we had the ability to mitigate irregularities at the local level. Since the implementation of National Work Queue, VSOs have been restricted more than ever in locally resolving problems at the regional office, such as the example we cited from Pittsburgh, where our local advocate was told by our leadership that calling the White House hotline was the only way they could move on a claim that required significant attention. In my many years as an accredited VSO, this is one of the most absurd responses I've heard from VA staff on an issue that could have been easily resolved. To be frank, the VFW has been doing this longer than VA. We pride ourselves in the advocacy we provide to our claimants. But what happens when VA no longer permits its employees to do the right thing locally? I fear that the drive to National Work Queue, while well-intentioned, has only amplified problems with VA's inconsistency. The goal was to level the playing field, to ensure veterans receive consistent, timely, quality decisions. The playing field is certainly more level today, but not in the way we intended. Instead, we see shoddy work from all corners of the VA with little accountability for what's gone wrong in the process. We see our leadership that is hamstrung from doing the right thing because it makes the national system look bad. Regarding the recent IG reports, they all point to sloppy development at the regional office and significant gaps in training. None of what the IG found came as a surprise to VFW, and this is no way to serve veterans. As with any new implementation, training is paramount to success. This is a persistent shortcoming in VBA. Across the VFW's field offices, our staff see little consistency in the application of law or the Code of Federal Regulation. VFW is acutely aware of instances where intent of a regulatory change is crystal clear, but applied irregularly at the majority of ROs, whether it's the acceptance of electronic signatures, recently updated forms, or simply processing dependency claims. As we discussed in detail in our written statement, if VA is fully committed to establishing a fully electronic and efficient claims process as they've touted over the past few years, they need to ensure consistency across all regional offices. In all of the scenarios we outlined in our prepared testimony, VFW maintains the proper training will result in better outcomes for VA and its customers. VA needs to get it right the first time, every time. The welfare of our veterans requires it. If quality training is not developed, implemented, and overseen, veterans and their families pay the price. As said in our opening statement, VFW has been embedded in the claims process for longer than VA has existed. We've always been able to provide local mediation to assist VA in getting it right, only to be told in the name of efficiency we can no longer do that. With the inconsistencies of the VFW has seen recently, it becomes clear the policies and innovations the VA seems extraordinarily proud of don't exist in the eyes of veterans and family members who continue to suffer delays and denials. In closing, the VFW does believe VBA is headed in the right direction in establishing a fully electronic and easily accessible claims process. However, VA still has significant problems in the system that need to be addressed, starting with the unrealized deficiencies of national work queue and the seeming lack of authority for ROs to resolve issues at the lowest possible level. We hope this subcommittee takes a hard look at these issues and works to resolve them in a way that truly benefits veterans. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. The VFW thanks you and the ranking member for the opportunity to testify on these issues, and I'm prepared to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Figlioli. Mr. Learman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Boss, Ranking Member Esty, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting DAV to testify at today's hearing on VA's implementation of policy initiatives and the challenges identified in the 3 recent OIG reports. We are deeply concerned over the findings of the significant deficiencies in these reports from July and August of this year. The reason for these substantial errors can be broken down into 3 main categories: training, IT systems development, and quality review. For example, the unwarranted medical reexaminations for disability benefits report estimated that during the 6-month review period, VBA spent over $10 million on examinations not required by VA policy. The reexaminations resulted in proposed benefit reductions for 3,700 veterans. The OIG determined the main reasons for the unwarranted examinations were lack of pre-examination review, lack of system automation, and inadequate quality assurance reviews. The report on processing inaccuracies involving veterans' intent to file submissions for benefits found that 97% of the cases reviewed with errors resulted in underpayments. On a national level, this resulted in an estimated $72 million in underpayments to veterans and their families. The reasons for the ITF processing errors were noted to be an absence of standard operating procedures and inadequate procedural guidance, deficient and delayed training, lack of quality assurance, and a lack of IT development as VBMS lacked functionality. In reference to the OIG report on denied PTSD claims related to military sexual trauma, VBA staff did not always follow policy and procedures, and as a result, they incorrectly processed approximately 49% of the MST-related claims that were denied during the review period. The reasons the MST-related claims were incorrectly processed were a lack of previous specialization, lack of additional review and discontinuance of specialized focus reviews, and inadequate training. In all 3 OIG reports, these errors could have been mitigated with the adoption of a VBA-wide strategic formula to apply prior to implementation of any new changes, processes, benefits, or IT systems. As demonstrated, VBA's erratic training, lack of planning for IT systems development, and uneven quality review has wasted millions of taxpayers' dollars, as well as underpaid, denied, and reduced thousands of veterans. VA needs to develop proactive measures to lessen these deficiencies in future projects. We recommend VBA to create a systematic strategic review process for new policies and initiatives. This could encompass each appropriate VA office potentially impacted by any of the new policies, such as VA Office of Training, VA Quality Assurance and Review, IT services, to include VBMS and the National Work Queue. However, to be truly effective, it requires VSOs and other stakeholders, as well as VA's frontline subject matter experts, including RVSRs and VSRs. A good example is how VBA, VA agencies, GAO, VSOs, and other stakeholders were all engaged from the beginning in the development of the Appeals Modernization Act. Before its implementation, VBA and BVA have collaborated to develop IT infrastructure, training programs, and quality review. This type of proactive strategy will lessen the preventable errors noted by the OIG. Mr. Chairman, the need for this type of strategic review process is again reaffirmed by the most recent OIG report released just last week. The accuracy of claims involving service-connected ALS report projected that 45% of the ALS claims completed during the 6-month review had erroneous decisions. And once again, OIG recommended that VBA provide additional training, better quality review, and add functionality to VBMS. A systematic strategic review process would focus on vetting new policies and initiatives to prevent these unintended consequences that negatively impact veterans and their families. It would be better for VA to invest time and resources preventing these problems from occurring rather than developing workarounds and patches after veterans have already been harmed. This pattern of systemic failures will continue unless action is taken. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you or any members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lehrman. Mr. Nemmerhard, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
The American Legion remains 100% committed to our veteran community and believe that our nation's heroes should not suffer at the hands of institutions whose existence and mission is to care for them. Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Esty, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, on behalf of our National Commander, Brett Rystad, and the nearly 2 million members of the American Legion, I thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Department of Veterans Affairs development and implementation of policy initiatives. We believe in quality of care at the VA facilities. We remain committed to a strong VA, and we believe that VA is a system worth saving. Since 2003, the American Legion has conducted more than 500 nationwide visits to VA medical centers and regional offices to assess the quality and timeliness of veterans' health care and provide feedback from veterans about the care and service provided by the VA. We compile reports from our visits into a publication for distribution to the President of the United States, Congress, and VA officials. The comprehensive report provides an understanding of VA challenges, best practices, and offers recommendations based on our observations in our nearly 100 years of experience. The Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General recently published 3 reports addressing unwarranted medical reexaminations, processing inaccuracies involving veterans' intent to file for benefits, and denied post-traumatic stress disorder claims related to military sexual trauma. The VA OIG reports cited inaccuracies, timeliness issues, lack of specialization, inadequate training, and overall poor quality of VA examinations completed by contracted medical examiners. The American Legion wants to protect veterans from these and other inadequacies and urge the VBA to take swift corrective action. We believe that a variety of factors cause these shortfalls, including lack of funding, understaffed VA facilities, and contracting companies solely focused on their bottom line at the veteran's expense. Mr. Chairman, the American Legion Resolution Number 87, we support the implementation of policy aimed at ensuring veterans receive adequate, comprehensive VA examinations. The VA OIG report regarding intent to file concluded that VBA staff did not always assign correct effective dates for compensation. VA led the entire initiative and set the deadlines well before publishing a proposed and final rule. Time constraints and any subsequent minimally viable product during this period was self-imposed. VA must address processing issues associated with intent to file to avoid additional costs and inconvenience to veterans and their families. VA claims must be processed accurately. Veterans should not experience additional harm in the process, especially when processing MST-related claims. The improper denial of nearly half the MST-related claims submitted to VA is unacceptable. Finding ways to ensure these veterans receive the services they deserve is one of the highest priorities of the American Legion. VBA should review all MST-related PTSD decisions since 2011 and share the results with Congress and VSOs to ensure accuracy, transparency, and accountability. The growing diversity of veterans mean that a system which primarily provided care to male enrollees must now evolve and adapt to meet the needs of all veterans and to provide them the best possible care. VA must continue to adjust to the changing demands of the population it serves. The American Legion continues to work directly with veterans to help them overcome challenges associated with access to VA healthcare and claims process. We remain committed to a VA that is appropriately funded, staffed, trained, and empowered to conduct internal quality reviews and oversight. Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Esty, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to share the American Legion's position on these vital issues impacting the men and women who have selflessly defended this nation. This concludes my remarks, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you. So we're going to go to the 5 minutes questionings, and I'm going to start out, Mr. Learman, we're going to start with you. And this is probably the most simple, straightforward question, but probably a very difficult one to answer, but do it anyway. How about that? Do you have any recommendations for how the VA can improve how it develops and implements new policies and initiatives?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we do. And I think one of the basic recommendations is to get everybody involved, whether it's upstream, downstream, within the VA system. Make sure all the offices are touching each other and being aware of the changes that are being made. For example, what happened with the MST-related claims, when they decided to put them in the national work queue, I don't know if everybody was fully aware we lost specialization. And prior to that, in 2015, they stopped doing the special focused review or quality review of those claims. So both of those things happened, which created the problem we're currently in. So it's like those decisions were made in a vacuum. What we need to do is bring everybody in together and discuss how these are going to touch, as well as VSOs, and I really believe our VSRs and VSRs should be a part of these conversations because they're the ones dealing with this work on the local level, so they truly understand what changes will impact them and the choices or decisions they make. So I think if we're able to get everybody together, maybe not in a formal setting, but be able to vet these things up and down with everybody involved so we can see some of these possible unintended consequences in the future and prevent these types of things from happening.
Mr. Figlioli, do you have anything to add to that you might suggest?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I can only concur with my colleague. It's something that we have brought up to the VBA, BAS, VA a number of times. Get everybody in the room, listen to all of our experienced opinions. We are their partners. I had to commend Dr. Lawrence since he's been the new undersecretary and being a bit more open and more inclusive. We see progress, but I would concur with my colleague.
Nemhard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to agree with my colleagues here, and I want to second Mr. Figlioli's comments about Dr. Lawrence bringing us to the table. We have seen an increase in communication and meeting with the VBA, and we truly appreciate that. I think that is the way forward, and we hope that that relationship continues to build.
All right, that kind of springboards me into the other question that I've got for each one of you. Can you describe the extent to which your organization consulted prior to the introduction of the NWQ and your organization's suggestions and incorporated the rollout?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess when the National Work Queue was rolled out, I'm not aware of any consultation that was specifically done across the board before it was rolled out. I think it was brought to us once it was closer to a test subject and already being tested and piloted. I guess what we would have liked to have pointed out at that time is to make sure that anything that is specialized can still be specialized within the system, because by removing that, it really has created a lot of the problems, not only with the MST, but the ALS.
So what you're saying, when I ask, were you consulted before? You were not consulted or talked to until it was already rolled out?
Well, Mr. Chairman, that happened before I was on our legislative staff. So to answer that confidently, I'm not sure, but I'm not fully aware that we were. We may have been. I would have to discuss that with our service department.
Does the VFW or the American Legion, either of you know whether you were?
Well, I was not in this position at the time, Mr. Chairman, but I can get you a more accurate answer to that after this session.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I, too, was not in this position at the time National Work Queue was developed. I can only add to that we did, after the fact, bring our concerns to VA. There have been improvements made, but at the end of the day, we still have lost local advocacy through the system.
Thank you, and that I yield back, and Ms. Esty, you're recognized for 5.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Undersecretary and his team for staying. It's really important that you're here to hear from the VSOs, and I think that I want that on the record, and I want that noted, because I think that is exactly what the three of you gentlemen are talking about, the importance of collaboration, of understanding we're all partners in doing better for veterans, and this is precisely what we always need to be doing. And I think what you noted about, and I was pleased, I will also note that all three of you concurred with the Undersecretary's assessment that appeals modernization is proceeding with that kind of input from the beginning, and I think that needs to be baked in as what is standard operating procedure. I also want to note, because I know from my conversation with the Undersecretary yesterday, to underscore the importance of what you do as VSOs. We discussed yesterday, he talked to me about how he had reviewed our hearing about the sort of notices veterans receive and the unintelligible language that leads to lots of questions and lots of appeals, a great deal of work by VSO officers. He said he looked at that tape and has begun a complete overhaul of those letters. So I think that speaks a lot to the importance of our collective efforts and our collaboration, whether it's members of Congress, members of the public, VSOs, those at the VA, to genuinely find a better way forward to serve the veterans community. And I think we need to keep those lines of communication open. It is, accountability is of course important, but the main mission is really to do it better and get it right the first time. What I hear all three of you talking about is in fact what we have seen, which is by taking, and the Undersecretary acknowledged, by focusing so much, I think, on the national work queue and that backlog and the timeliness issue, the eye got taken off of quality. Quality has to be there. And so your input as these processes move forward to make sure we pick back up specialization. Mr. Figlioli, you mentioned something that has been, I think, much on our mind, is how we utilize the benefits of the national work queue, but don't have the siloing and don't have the delay that happens when you can't resolve claims within a single regional office. Could you expand on that a little bit? Given that we have the national work queue in place now, how can you imagine, you mentioned empowering, the ability to decide issues closer to that granular level. Can you talk about what you've seen or concepts you have for how we can try to better integrate the best of both worlds, right? That granular concentration in one office, yet the efficiency of having national work queue.
Thank you, Ranking Member. It's been a concern for a while. I think my colleagues would also agree. Before National Work Queue, you sat face-to-face with a veteran, you heard their story, you heard their concerns, you built a relationship with them. You knew the people in the regional office, and you were able to have conversations as that claim went through the system. As National Work Queue has been implemented, the claim may start off in Boston, it will go to New York, it can be out into the Philippines, all on the same day. And at some point, that local advocate has lost eyes on what that claim is. Suddenly, we're asking a VSO that's in Houston, who had no input in the beginning of the session or the process, to review a claim and alert VA to what is good, bad, or indifferent about that claim, but not know the personal touch of that veteran's personal story. Then the other process is going back to get these things corrected. Since they moved across the country, we no longer have the ability to just get in the elevator and go downstairs and talk to somebody. We have to send things via email or via phone call to several regional offices. And by the time you get caught up with it, it could be moved somewhere else. It's highly inefficient, and it's just a shame that we have lost that ability to get things resolved at the lowest possible level before they end up in appeals.
If anyone else has thoughts on this is going to be an ongoing issue, I think, about how to get the efficiency and of those medical records, electronic medical records, and processing of claims, specialization, but also that personal touch. So again, I want to thank you as we move forward in this committee, over in the Senate, with our colleagues at the VA, how to do a better job, and again, try to get the best of that efficiency with the quality, the timeliness, and that human touch, the hands-on that the VSOs have always provided, and I think we need to provide We should not expect our veterans to be experts in appeals law, Veterans Affairs regulations. That's not their job. It's our job to take care of them. So again, I want to thank all of you for joining us here today, and I want to thank the chairman for his ongoing efforts and all of you to do better for our veterans. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for being here. With that, I would want to recognize ranking member if she has or any closing remarks she might want to make besides what she did.
I think this is going to be my last subcommittee hearing in Congress on this with this really wonderful committee, and I want to thank all of you for your partnership, your hard work, and I am strongly urging this big new class of freshman members of Congress, whether they serve on this committee or not, to honor that commitment to our nation's veterans. And Mr. Nemhard, you mentioned a really important issue about the diversity that we see of our veterans now. And we need to keep our eye on that moving forward. We have a very diverse group of veterans we're serving now. World War II veterans who have certain life experience, certain way they want to interface with the VA. And we've got brand new veterans coming out who are unprecedented numbers of women, much younger, much different backgrounds. And that is a challenge for all of us, but I hope we're all up to the challenge. And I hope the 116th Congress and this committee will continue to do its best to be honest brokers and partners in doing better for our nation's veterans. And I want to thank the chairman and the excellent staff on this committee for their hard work and their bipartisan cooperation to make sure that we are all, to the best possible, rowing in the same direction and doing our level best every day for our nation's veterans. Thank you all, and I yield back.
Thank you, and before we do adjourn, let me say this. It has been one of the greatest honors that you could ever imagine being chairman of this committee. And let me tell you that what we do as far as our veterans, those living and those passed through this committee, is very humbling to work on this committee. Being chairman of the subcommittee, I'll tell you, I couldn't ask for, I want to thank Ms. Esty. We were able to work together in a bipartisan manner when quite often in Congress the bipartisanship doesn't occur as often as it should. I also want to say a special thank you to the staff. The staff has been wonderful, both Republican and Democrat staff, hardworking, and it is the mission and our mission to make sure our veterans are taken care of. With that, and know this, as a Marine, and I will continue to serve in Congress, I will still continue to focus on our veterans' issues. And I thank the American people and my people that voted for me in my district that gave me this opportunity. And thank you to Chairman Rowe for giving me the opportunity to be chairman of this subcommittee. So finally, as I said earlier, hold on. And also to ways to improve with the department and assist any way we can. So with that, I'm going to say, as I did earlier, complete written statements for today's witnesses will be entered into the hearing record. I ask for unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to rise and extend their remarks and include extenuous material. Hearing no objections, so ordered, this hearing is now adjourned.